Matt Miguez has plenty on his mind, and he's ready to share it with the world. It's time to hear the Miguez Mindset.
And we welcome you into a Week 3 edition of the Miguez Mindset here on ESPN 103.7 Lafayette and 104.1 Lake Charles YouTube channel. Matt Miguez, joined by the host of The Lowdown, Mr. Dawson Eiserloh. We're going to be talking everything from the Louisiana Raging Cajuns to the New Orleans Saints, getting you set for what should be a great weekend of football. Dawson, first I want to start with the Cajuns, 2-0 coming off a bye week. They've got a really tough test against a 1-2 Tulane squad who, if you look at the paper, you go, okay, well, they're 1-2. But those two losses were to high-powered, one Big 12 and one SEC squad, and they were in both games late. So just give me, your general thoughts on this matchup.
Yeah, and it's two ranked teams, one on the road, one at home for Tulane. And, I don't know which game was more impressive for me, right? Because they play Kansas State, and it's one of those situations, Avery Johnson, a dark horse Heisman candidate everybody's talking about. And Darian Mensah, the freshman for Tulane at quarterback, really kind of plays, just as well, if not outplays him at times. Now, Mensah made the big mistake late in the game, fumbled the football. That allowed Kansas State to close things out against them. So that game was impressive, right, because they went toe-to-toe with a power conference team. Then they go to Oklahoma the very next week. A hurricane hits the area during the week, by the way, disrupts their practice schedule a little bit, and they're down 21-0. And to battle back into that game, get it to 24-19, as you mentioned, late in that football game, I was so impressed with the kind of resolve that John Summerall's team showed. So, no, look, if you're the Louisiana Raging Cajuns, you are this is by far the best team you've played so far this year. To be honest with you, there's an argument to be made that it's the best team on your schedule in the regular season, especially based on what we thought about App State versus what we saw happen to App State last night against South Alabama, right? So Tulane might be the best team you play. Them, Wake Forest next week, and then maybe one of those Sun Belt teams like Texas State. Outside of that, they are going to be formidable. So you're going to have to play a really clean football game to win. I think Coach Decimo and his team knows that. They did have the extra week. Sometimes, is that an advantage? Is that almost a disadvantage in this case to have an off week this early in the year? It remains to be seen. I think you use it as best you can. The Cajuns should be the more well-rested team, but the Green Wave are the more tested team. Right. So which one kind of plays off? We'll see.
Yeah, like you mentioned, the bye week, sometimes it could be an advantage, sometimes it can be a disadvantage. Tulane being physically bruised, this early in the season. I'm interested to see how quickly we find out if that's an advantage or not, right?
Yeah, for sure. And look, I talked to Corey Glore, the voice of the Wave, yesterday. He told me from an injury standpoint, now look, maybe are they going to be worn down mentally and physically going into the game? That's something that can't be measured on paper. But as far as availability, Tulane got through it pretty clean. Yep. They have most of their guys. There's no injuries to the quarterback position. There's no serious guys missing off the lines of scrimmage, which is something you always worry about when you play against big-time SEC programs. So they got out of it in that regard pretty clean. And the Cajuns have a couple injuries of their own. Now, they got some guys back, but they're still going to be without Jax Harrington, who's got a chance to be an all-conference type offensive lineman this year. Draylon Washington returns, which is important at the running back position. You get all three of those guys after how well both Bill Davis and Zylan Perry played on the road in Kennesaw. But so both teams pretty healthy, which is good to see. Like, this is going to be pretty full-strength rosters going at it in a Week 3 matchup where, one of these teams is going to get a big win for the rest of their season. I think we know that for sure.
And the sudden absence of Cortland Flowers from the team will also be an interesting talking point throughout that game. That one's at 11 o'clock. You can watch it on ESPNU. Let's flip over to the LSU Tigers, the 16th ranked LSU Tigers. They return home to play with UCLA on Saturday afternoon, a 2:30 kick on ABC. Pregame begins at 12:30 right here on our airwaves on ESPN 103.7 Lafayette and 104.1 Lake Charles. Look, LSU is in this, funny spot, right? They dropped the game to USC at the beginning of the season, and many people believe that LSU should have won that game, myself included. And then, last week against South Carolina, there were multiple opportunities that South Carolina had to win the game. Some people have been saying that LSU kind of got lucky to get out of there with a 36-33 win. Now you come home, play a interesting.
Nice way to say
UCLA
it.
team, you're a 22.5 point favorite. This kind of feels like a little bit of a trap game, though, for LSU in a sense. Give me your thoughts.
Yeah, I guess you can say trap game. I don't know if I see it that way. I think LSU feels probably pretty fortunate to have gotten away with the win, like you said. They know that they, could have lost that one, but they found a way. I think that almost maybe re-energizes them and says, all right, let's go ahead and leave no doubt in a game where they're the much more talented team. UCLA's, look, they got a first-year head coach, Deshaun Foster. They're trying to kind of put the pieces back together. They lost their defense coordinator, who went to USC, of course, who LSU found all about in the first game of the season. Ethan Garber's at the quarterback spot is a guy who's got some talent, but right now there's not a whole lot around him. He's struggling. They got really just housed by Indiana last week, which maybe Kurt Cignetti's a little ahead of schedule with that Hoosiers program. But I think LSU's a much better football team, and they've kind of got to show that, right? Even the game that they were, way outclassing their opponent in Nichols, they messed around a little bit, and that game got a little dicey in the second half. Not that it was ever really in doubt. I think this is their kind of chance to say, all right, we're going to prove who we are. And look, there's a very real argument to be said that this is a less of a test than what they're going to face next week with South Alabama for that same thing we mentioned with the App State game. They put up 48. But I think LSU comes out and kind of shows who's the better football team here. I haven't seen much from UCLA. Maybe they're waiting, and maybe we see something that we haven't seen yet from the Bruins. But it was a dicey win against a Hawaii team in a non-power conference matchup, and then it was a big-time loss to Indiana.
How impressed have you been with LSU's true freshman running game, especially Caden Durham, who really just exploded against South Carolina last week? Obviously, Juwan Johnson has been used in spurts. Just kind of give me your thoughts about that youth in that running back room.
Yeah, and look, the running back position is one where it's interesting because I think it's a spot where you can get some really young, talented guys some opportunities. You can give them the football a handful of times a game. How much you play those guys usually depends on, can they do the other stuff? Can you trust them in pass protection? Can you trust them to know their assignments when they're not getting the football?
No.
And it feels like the amount that Caden Durham was used last week, that trust level is pretty high. I don't know if it's quite there with Juwan Johnson. And remember, he's dealing with a whole different set of circumstances where he just moved to this position a couple weeks ago. So I don't even know if it's fair to ask him to understand every level of the position. But Durham kind of stepped up and said, all right, maybe I am the guy. And, Josh Williams is one that they trust and is still going to play a lot. Caleb Jackson's, I think, a guy where we're looking at it and going, does this kind of motivate him to maybe pick up his level of play, or does he get discouraged by maybe getting less touches moving forward? Like I said, these next two games, UCLA and South Alabama, are probably an opportunity for LSU to really figure out what the roles are, because after that, it's Ole Miss and it's go time. So I'll be interested to see what that balance looks like both this week and next, and if Brian Kelly kind of uses these two games to figure out what the load and what the workload balance will be the rest of the way.
You can read up on RP3's preview of that game over on ESPN Southwest Louisiana.com. Speaking of our game previews, how about the McNeese Cowboys? They welcome Alcorn State to Cowboy Stadium. Now, this is a team that Gary Goff has yet to beat in his tenure with McNeese. Obviously, McNeese comes off a big win last week against Stephen F. Austin. They're 2-2 going into their, starting to go into their Southland schedule a little bit here. Alcorn is an interesting squad because you've got a guy, you've got a quarterback who's a dual threat guy. He can do both. He can throw the ball really well. He can run the ball really well. And a similar story with Clifton McDowell, right? Also, McNeese's leading rusher going into this Week 5 matchup for McNeese. What are your thoughts in terms of the Cowboys? Obviously, Gary Goff's been under a lot of pressure this year. Do you think they can kind of build a winning streak here at home?
Well, that's the big question, right? I mean, last week's game was just silly. I mean, the SFA game and McDowell and the comeback, the Hail Mary at the end of the first half, and then, the drives they put together. So here's the question. The last two drives that scored touchdowns, eventually one of them being the game winner, where McDowell kind of took things into his own hands. You saw that, running ability with him. Is that the precursor to the sort of momentum being built, or was that a couple of nice drives that are outliers? That's what we'll find out. I think we'll find out Saturday. I think we'll know whether or not that offense has made progress, because remember, he missed the A&M game the week before. So you had these two games with McDowell, the one where they kind of experimented with letting Sixkiller take a couple of drives. Well, the SFA game was like, okay, this is maybe what our offense looks like when it's running well. Do they carry that momentum over? They should. And Alcorn, I don't know if we have a great gauge on them. They've been blown out by two FBS teams that probably had a lot more talent than they did. They blew out a team that they probably had a lot more talent than. Probably much more evenly matched. Again, those are a lot of assumptions, but we think McNeese and Alcorn, talent-wise, are going to match up with each other. Maybe McNeese has the advantage in that regard. But that's my biggest thing. Do you take the last couple drives and what allowed you to win the game against SFA, which, by the way, it's better to correct issues when you win than when you lose. Do you take those and do you move forward with them, or do we start to see more of the offense from the first 2 weeks that just seemed out of sync?
All right, as we chat with Dawson Eiserloh here on the Miguez Mindset, the black and gold. Let's go to the NFL now. The New Orleans Saints. What a historic start, right? Mm-hmm. You're talking about a team that has scored 91 points in 2 games. It is the 4th most in NFL history. It was the 2nd most in franchise history. And by the way, the Saints team that had the most went on to win a Super Bowl. They face a really talented Eagles squad. This might be their biggest test yet of the season, depending on how you feel about the Dallas Cowboys. Obviously, Jalen Hurts is a guy that, can do a lot of different things for the Eagles. And, obviously running quarterbacks historically, the Saints have had a lot of trouble trying to control them, right? So on paper, it's interesting that the line has changed so much because this game opened as a 2.5-point favorite in favor of Philly. And now it has swung to New Orleans being a 2.5-point favorite. So what do you where's your gauge on the Saints through 2 games?
Oh, it's funny too. And I've said this before, I think now too, with the way sports betting is, I'm not really a betting guy, but I like to look at the lines to try and, gauge what information maybe Vegas is using. I don't know if I can gauge as much as I used to because now it feels like the lines are so based on where the markets are. Yeah. I don't know. I was shocked to see Philly, a 2.5-point favorite, going on the road to a team that just had a statement win in New Orleans, who has a nice home field advantage. The Dome's going to be rocking. The ticket prices are skyrocketing for this game. Everybody's bought back in. So I was shocked. Now to see it flip back to 2.5, I don't know. Does that just mean a lot of bets came in on the Saints? I'm not sure. But what I do know is it's been an unbelievable start. It's not sustainable. It doesn't have to be sustainable. You don't have to score 45 points a game to win down the stretch. But Derek Carr and the offense looks sharp. You have a nice rejuvenated group of skill players that I think, look, we saw the talent in some of them before, but now it feels like you're getting the most out of Rashid Shaheed. Defensively is where I'm really fascinated with this matchup because Philadelphia is going to do some things that are definitely different than what Dallas and Carolina threw at you. Carolina didn't throw much at you at all. Dallas moved the ball, and, you saw a little bit of issues with CeeDee Lamb. Adebo got a little grabby, but maybe Marshawn Lattimore returns. We're still waiting to see the final injury designation, but he returned to practice, which is good to see.
Yep.
I want to see this Saints pass rush get after Jalen Hurts, but also contain him, right? There's situations in this game where I think it's different than other quarterbacks you face, where keeping him in the pocket, making him throw the football might be your best bet. Now, Hurts can beat you from there. He brought the Eagles to a Super Bowl. Let's not forget that. I think sometimes it gets muddied and people think of Hurts as just this dual threat guy. He has changed the perception of him in my book based on how he's been able to beat you with his arm. But he's probably not going to have A.J. Brown, his best receiver. He might not have Johnny Wilson, who's a rookie who you figure at least could have helped him out, a guy I'm familiar with from his time at Florida State. So can you handle Devontae Smith and then kind of funnel it down to those other pass catchers? And right now, I think the Saints defense in a pretty good spot, but they've got to prove it. They've got to go out and kind of have another good, solid performance because I just don't think, even if the offense continues to execute well, I don't think they're going to keep scoring 40-plus points every week.
You see, you walked perfectly into my next question. A.J. Brown still listed as doubtful for this game. We talked about Marshawn Lattimore as well. We'll wait to see what his status is. But if he does come back and A.J. Brown does not play, obviously Marshawn Lattimore is going to move to covering Devontae Smith. And that kind of puts the Saints at an advantage, in my opinion, because you're putting your best corner on their second best receiver, and that kind of frees up the rest of your secondary. Talk to me about that advantage for the Saints if Lattimore goes and Brown does not.
It is an advantage. I'll be interested, actually. I would wonder if Lattimore would fully shadow or not, just because Devontae Smith is not your prototypical outside guy. I think Lattimore definitely would have went with Brown if he was out there, but with Smith, they're going to move him. He's going to play in the slot some. Do the Saints prefer to just let Alontae Taylor stay in the slot, and if Smith moves down in there, just let him go? Do they decide to go ahead and shadow and give that number one corner treatment to him with Lattimore? Maybe it depends how healthy Lattimore is, right? If Lattimore goes, but he's not 100%, maybe they go, hey, just stay on the outside. We're going to run a little bit more zone than we normally would. I don't know how any of that factors in, but I don't know if it's as set and forget it, Lattimore's going to follow Devontae Smith around. They might change it up. It's interesting, too. I was talking to Gino Camilleri with Locked on Eagles earlier today, and he was saying, like there's a problem for Philly in that Britton Covey's been their next best receiver. And, look, Britton Covey, guy I'm a very big fan of what he did at Utah as a punt returner. He's this nice kind of skilled player. But they need somebody else to step up. They need guys to be healthy. And right now, like we said, they just don't have that health. So is it somebody else for Philly who steps up? Do you go maybe to more of the tight end position, guy like Dallas Goedert? And how much can Saquon beat you out of the backfield? I think it's another thing for the Saints here. You got to make sure you have that running game where Hurts and Barkley are going to try and beat you together. They got to key in on that as well, because if Philly doesn't have those dynamic plays in the passing game, they're going to try and lean on you a little bit.
All right, let's run back through them all one more time. I want to get your picks on each of these games and why you think it's going to go the way you think that it's going to go. Now let's look at the four games again. We'll start with Tulane and Louisiana. What are some keys to victory for you for the Cajuns?
Absolutely. Defensively, the Cajuns have got to limit the opportunities that Tulane's playmakers get in space. And, there's a variety of different ways that maybe will lead to that, pressuring the quarterbacks to start. But guys like Mario Williams, he's a USC transfer. Dante Fleming, the Cajuns know well about him. He's a Cajuns transfer. You can't let those two guys get the football with space to work with, because they can beat you and they can take it to the house. So I think you've got to do a good job of, A, limiting the down the field shots that they get to those guys, and then B, making tackles in the open field. Cajuns have been pretty good tackling in these first two games. They've got to be really better on Saturday. I think that's the key defensively. On the offensive side, let Ben Wooldridge's experience be an asset to you in this game, right? Let him make some really smart decisions. Take your shots when they're there, but don't force it. You have an advantage in the quarterback experience room. You got to use it.
Now, what about for the Tigers at home against UCLA? What's kind of the key for them?
Yeah, and I was talking about this earlier. I think third downs is an opportunity here. For LSU defensively, they've actually been pretty good on third downs. And the worst game they had was against Nichols, surprisingly enough. But against USC and against South Carolina, they did a pretty good job limiting your third down effectiveness for an opposing offense. And UCLA has really struggled. I think they're somewhere around 29% on third downs in the first couple games. So you got to keep getting off the field when you get chances to do so. Now, the thing that's hurt LSU is even when they've been getting off the field on third down, they've been giving up these big chunk touchdown plays like the long run to Rocket Sanders for South Carolina. I think you will be limiting those. I think you're playing a little bit of a less talented offense, like I said, but keep getting off the field on third down. And when it comes to the LSU offense, I think just be patient. You've got the athletes to beat UCLA on the outside. So if you're Nussmeier, don't force it because you don't have to. Just take what they give you, and you're going to score a lot of points on Saturday.
McNeese, key to victory, it's got to be Clifton McDowell.
It is, and it's not just McDowell, but it's that offense getting into a rhythm. And it's just when they've been going, like I said, they put together these 13, 14 play drives that look beautiful, and then all of a sudden it's a bunch of 3 and outs strung together, right? So just have that consistency. And, I think some of that goes to play calling, just making sure you're getting into good looks. But it's McDowell being a good decision maker. He's throwing the ball a little bit more effectively than I thought he would. So, yeah, simple as that. And then on the other side of the football, just keep freeing up Micah Davey to be one of the best players in the FCS, which is what he is. And he'll be making 15, 16 tackles like he always does. And on the other end, you should be able to outscore Alcorn.
And then lastly, for the New Orleans Saints, looking to go 3-0 again against a really tough NFC opponent. What's the key?
Keep establishing the run offensively. I think that's what it starts with. And we get a lot, we get sidetracked with these beautiful deep balls that Carr's been laying up to Shaheed and others. But that's only available to them, and he only has that amount of time. They only have that amount of protection because they're running the ball in early downs with Alvin Kamara and Jamal Williams. So keep doing that up front, and I think you'll be successful on offense. Defensively, like I said, you can't let Hurts beat you outside the pocket. And if he beats you inside the pocket, I think you can live with that, especially given the limited group of pass catchers he has around him and a really talented secondary. So just don't let Hurts and Barkley run wild on you. And if that rushing number is under, 150 yards for the game, I think the Saints will be in good shape.
It's Dawson Eiserloh, the host of The Lowdown, every weekday from 1 to 3 right here on ESPN Southwest Louisiana. D-Lo, appreciate your time. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel at ESPN Southwest Louisiana, and also follow us on social media at ESPN_SWLA. This has been the Miguez Mindset on ESPN.